it's like food. You like psychic food. If you give yourself vitamins. We're trying to eat healthy, so why can't we do that? The very same thing for our minds and for our hearts, just the whole system.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the podcast called Biz on the Brain with your host, me, Annemarie Strahl, who has made it her mission currently to find ways to be truly and unapologetically yourself in life and business. Because to me, being an entrepreneur means there are no clear-cut boundaries between what's fun, what's work, what's play, because everything kind of feeds into one another. And I think if you made something your business that you're really, really passionate about, yes, there's the danger of it becoming a bit tedious when you make it your job and you try to get monetary value attached to it and sell it, but also it can help feed your creativity. So on and off, everything you do in your life, your mindset affects how you show up for others, affects how you show up for yourself in your business, and in that business, how you interact with other people. And with that, there's so many underlying habits and patterns that sometimes we need to just look at and see if they still serve us. And with the recent trends, I don't know if it's still very recent, because over the past years, the self-development, self-care, and the mindfulness trend has really picked up, which I think is really, really important, because that is something that's not really taught in schools and is very great in helping people become well-rounded, compassionate towards themselves and others. And it's such a key skill to have, honestly. And so I'm very excited to introduce to you the anxiety hypnotherapist, Yelena Theofilatos, who is currently living in Hawaii, which I'm so excited about. It's such a dream place I still have not visited, but she's made it her mission to help entrepreneurs really clear some obstacles in their paths through the power of the subconscious. And if you remember correctly, we already had an episode about hypnotherapy, and that was super insightful and really interesting to talk about how the subconscious can really affect things showing up in your life, like manifestation, if you want to call it that, or success or failure, or the attitude you attribute to things, because we all go through ups and downs, and that is especially true as an entrepreneur. The highs and the lows are extreme at some point. So it's really good to work with yourself and not against it. So without further ado, and with a lot of excitement, I want to introduce to you Yelena. Well, hello. Thank you so much for being on this podcast, Yelena. So I hope I did not butcher your name. Please tell the world how to say it correctly, because I want people to get this right, because I'm very testy about getting names right. But what's your name properly?
Okay. I'm Russian and my husband is Greek. So my first name is Russian and my last name is Greek. Yelena Theofilatos, which is a mouthful. Yelena Theofilatos. It's like too many syllables right there. So if you just want to call me Lena or Yelena, whatever. It's like Helen, Eleni, Ilana. I've been everything in my life, so either one of those totally work. But I really respect your, being so considerate of other people's name. I think it's an honorable quality to have, that's for sure.
Well, it comes from having my name butchered all my life anyway, so I feel that, and I hate it. I get very, very testy about it, and I think it's just a basic form of respect to just at least ask how to say someone's name or try to get it right and not just assume. Thank you. I don't like when people just go and assume and just slap on a new name what they think is best for their own comfort, and I think that's not the way to go about it, so... But I think your name is super beautiful. It's so long, which I can relate to, because my name barely fits into forms, right? Yeah. But it's so nice and so multicultural, and I think that's what you're also all about, like being very mindful of different, people, different cultures. So what made you want to become a hypnotherapist, and what is your special angle? Like, how do you want to help the world, basically, from your little cozy paradise?
Good question. Okay, answer the first part of it first. How did I get inspired to become a hypnotherapist? Well, I wanted to be a therapist a counselor since I was very young. I got into like psychology. I was reading Freud when I was like 13. I did not have the first best impressions of psychology just by reading only his literature. I'm like, oh, it's
He's a
cool, but there
lot.
gotta be so much more than that.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
a he's a father of like modern psychology and at the same time. But anyway, it's a tangent. It's a tangent. We don't
Oh,
necessarily
I
have to
love that
go there.
tangent. I love talking psychology and I love talking changes in psychology because he's being put on such a pedestal. But there's so many ways that, things have been disproven and things have been
Right.
elaborated and built upon or questioned, and it's always right. But anyway, we could just talk about psychology. Oh my God, I would be happy.
Yeah, that's like my favorite topic. Hypnotherapy also, like I can talk to the point when I can't stop and people's faces and their eyes kind of like, glaze over and I'm still talking. So anyway, this is how passionate I am about this whole topic. Since I was little, I was like, I just want to know why people do things. What's behind it all? What's in here? What is this whole thing is about? And I went a different route. I didn't go to a psychology school because it's a long story, but I ended up studying finance and banking because that's what my family wanted me to do. When I was growing up in Russia, there were the time of poverty for us specifically. My parents were doctors, and they're like, "We want you to make money. We want you to have a different life than we had. Like, go be a banker." I'm like, "Okay,
They didn't
let's
make
do
money as
this."
doctors.
Not at that time in Russia. Now it's different, but it was
Communist
there was a
times.
moment 90s, Soviet Union falling apart, an economical crisis. Teachers and doctors were the least paid professions.
Yeah.
Strangely and crazily enough, like those are most important people in bringing our new generation, just keeping us healthy mentally and physically. Anyway, like now there's too many bankers and lawyers in Russia because we were of that generation. They're like, let's do something like different from what our parents did. But anyway, I came to New York City when I was 20, I think. Yes, I had one more year to finish in Russia, that university that I was attending, and I was like, that's not the life I want to have. I have nothing against Russia. I didn't have at that point. Like, I just don't want to be a banker. And I said, like, okay, I'm just gonna stay in New York and let's see what happens. I'm gonna go to school here. That was my dream then, that kept me kind of alive throughout all of the challenges of immigration. And I ended up doing the undergrad bachelor's degree in New York. And then I found hypnosis, right? Like a year after that. And I was like, oh, what it's such a cool tool. I can be like a hypnotherapist. I don't necessarily have to go to school to do another degree, like in master's or PhD. But I ended up doing it anyway. And anyway, fast forward to now, I had another amazing training. Like in the midst of COVID, I found like the training I needed. When I was in grad school, I was so at loss what to do with all of those people coming to me for therapy. We're supposed to be able to help them, but we just fed so much theory. We do have supervisors, we do have some support, and ultimately we're there like in the session on our own. So I was just teaching everybody mindfulness. Doesn't matter what you came with, I'm like, mindfulness, here we go. So when I found the course that I found like a year and two later, I was like, yes, now hypnotherapy and therapy makes sense to me together. I can see how hypnosis can be such a powerful tool to teach and impart certain skills and mindset experientially, something that necessarily conversational language does not have a place for. Not always. Sometimes it can be done in a story, when we give someone a metaphor, a beautiful analogy. And I don't know how about you, but when somebody gives me a metaphor, I feel it in my body. It's not just like in the mental, like intellectual experience. It's an experience like for my whole system, like, oh, And I get it. Like I learn so much better with metaphors than just like linear language. I love it as well, like being didactic and just like that. But metaphors and stories, that's where my inspiration is. So that was a long-winded a bit, but like that's the story how I got
I
what I
love
got
it.
in my life.
And on the metaphors, I think that's very powerful because a lot of times, especially when people are new to psychotherapy or hypnosis or any kind of mental awareness, right? It's not taught in school. It is not specifically applauded. It's actually more ridiculed, oftentimes called woo-woo or whatever. And
Exactly.
people, for instance, like me, the first time I had to go to physiotherapy, I was deeply depressed. I knew there was something wrong. I didn't get any help from my environment because they literally didn't know how. They gave me helpful, in quotation marks, for the people who can't see the video, not very helpful, advice like, go get a hobby. You're so depressed. You're bringing everybody down. Just smile more, do some fun stuff. And I'm like, I don't think that's right. Thank you so much for your advice, but thank you, I will not take it. And so somebody reached out to me and she was like, you know what? I have a spot at my physiotherapist. You should go. And it's really, really hard in Germany to even get a spot. You have to wait at least a year until you find somebody, and then you don't really have the luxury of actually finding someone who is right for you, because I've also had people who are really, really wrong for me. And that can be very detrimental. Anyway, but you don't know if you don't know, right? And so she put me in contact with her therapist, which was really good. But I didn't know that. I just sat there being like a stoic teenager. Like, I was so numb from the depression. I could not feel anything anymore other than sadness. I would cry myself to sleep every day. And that's the only emotion I had at that point, which was really scary. And so I was just sitting there and she would just stare at me. She's like, how you feeling? I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't feel. And she's like, okay. And then we just sat in silence, which I hate, and which is a tool in itself. I was like, are we wasting this time? And she's like, no, we can just like sit in silence. I'm like, that's dumb. And so I was constantly being like combative. And then she would just ask me how I'm feeling, and I would slowly just come up with more words. And she would be like, good, good. And so where do you feel these words? And I was like, what? I looked at her like she's weird in the head. I was like, what? How do I feel the words in my body? And she's like, yeah, what's the color? Like, do they feel heavy? Are they on your collarbone or in your stomach? Like, is it like a punch? Knowing all these different words. And there's like wheels of emotion, which are really helpful for people if they want to look it up online, if they need some visual cues or whatever. And I looked at her as if that's the strangest thing, and now that I've done more work, I realize it's very, very important. Like, you need to teach your kids what specific emotions are, so they can differentiate. Like, fear from excitement is often a common thing that gets mixed up, or like there's so many ways to be happy. Like, you don't always have to be super over the moon happy or like thrilled or outraged in a good way. Like, you cannot just be content or like mellow or just like pleased. There's so many different ways, and they all kind of feel different. And the more you get in line with that, the more you can know where you actually at without feeling confused. Or, you listen to your body, and then it actually tells you how you think about things, which helps you being more decisive, because that's something I struggle with. And then when like, okay, this kind of feeling kind of feels like yellow bile in my throat, or like sometimes it's like a gray kind of rock thing sitting outside my stomach, and sometimes it's sitting inside, but it's more brown. Like, it's ridiculous, but for everybody it's different, right? So for some people it's less, it's more abstract, right? And so having metaphors is actually a helpful almost crutch for people to associate imagery or a feeling or a vision and like an icon of some sort with them, to put it into a box so they can label it better, or that evokes imagery. Like, perfumes kind of evoke memories, right? Certain music evokes certain memories, and the more you can teach people that kind of mindfulness and give them different ways to approach it, because we're all different, right? So some people don't have the visual way of seeing things. Like, I literally see things almost like a projection sometimes when I get very descriptive in my head, or people tell me a story, then I almost see it like a movie playing in my head. And I know not everybody has that fantasia is what it's called. They have aphantasia. And so it's really important to know that about yourself and be like, that's fine, no judgment, it's just what it is. And then like to have those tools. And I think hypnosis really helps get out of that head where you try to make it make sense, and you just say words that work in that way, and then you can help guide them. For instance, when I did one hypnotherapy session with someone, I saw like a tower that I know exists in near Porto and not Porto, near Lisbon, in Portugal. And I always wanted to go. And like that was what I saw, and like I could feel the bricks, and I can see the moss and whatever, and like it's always like that kind of tower. If this is the specific kind of hypnosis, and then sometimes it's water, and it just. Sometimes I see these visions in my daily life, and then I reflect on it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is this feeling, this is this memory. And so how did you find hypnosis works best with people? Do you help them, or do you ask them first with the actual problem, or do you just work it out together? Because it's different for everybody. Everybody's at different stages.
It's a good question, and thank you so much for sharing. You got me thinking about so many things. No, bring it all back to. Yeah, I tend to the first meeting I ever have with a person. We spend the whole time talking. There's no like a formal, so to say, guided hypnotherapy journey happening, like when they close their eyes and stuff like that. That's like the second session, and the third, and maybe like however many they want to be doing that. I tend to do like 3 minimum. That's what I feel like we spend enough time going over the topics that needs to be
Is it one
reminded
topic of. Or like a string that are kind of related?
It depends on the person. I tend to do like a bouquet of a few different topics. It depends on a person how much they can take in without getting overwhelmed by all the information. Of course, like when it comes to hypnotherapy journey itself, they're gonna have a recording after, so they can go back. Like when I have hypnotherapy sessions myself as a client, I don't remember what I've been hearing the whole time because I drift on and off. So technically they can go back and listen to it and find those pieces that that they missed in a session, and at the same time try not to, because I have a tendency to do so, I try to like put so much in one session, like 5 different big themes, and it can be a little bit too much for the peoples. It tend to kind of be around like some major topic that we're working on, and there's offshoots here and there just to support the main thing that we're working with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because also it's I get very impatient with like self-development and my brain. I'm just like, why am I not healed yet? Like, why haven't this topic? And I get very impatient, which is a clear indicator that I'm definitely not healed on that part. When I'm still not compassionate about it, and like I spot it, but it's just aggravating me. That I have tools and I know in theory what the trigger is. Like I get very over analytical out of my head, so I actually don't feel the feelings that need to be felt. It's like my kind of coping mechanism where I over intellectualize it, which I know and I'm aware of it, and so like it spirals around me being way too aware but not grounded enough. So definitely the journey is rough. Like sometimes it feels very overwhelming when you have so many things and you see it from an outside perspective. You're like, oh yeah, these are the topics, we need to clear them, but then actually doing it might take a long time, and hypnotherapy is really good at doing it like pretty quickly, or like a fast track way. I almost feel like it's you go to a dentist, you could look into your mouth and like look at your teeth, but like hypnotherapy is like going into with like the little light and the little tweezer thingy that they in the mirror that they have, so like to see better, right? So like it's just a different way to do a better job. Yeah, because why do it hard? Because like classic therapy is all about deep-seated things and childhood trauma, and like talking about things and slowly unraveling patterns over a long period. And you have to be committed every week. You have to show up, and and like I said, I get impatient. I'm just like, can we just get to the bad stuff? Can we just just poke around in my childhood wounds, just like do stuff, and let it bleed or whatever, just fix it. And my family's like, no, it takes a couple of years. I'm like, I don't have the time. I'm just like, I know what the problems are, just like, I've already like been through it a lot of time. It's like, I just, there's a scar already. Can we just like pick the scab now? Right. So like, I don't know, and it's always evolving, and there's like so many different ways. Oh my gosh, like now we're talking psychology again, right? Like cognitive therapy and like group therapies. Like, it's like so many ways that are so different to other people. And the other day I listened to I don't know if you know, like the podcast by Jamil Away, and she interviewed Rachel Bloom, which I absolutely adore. I love her so much. And in that podcast episode, it was all about mental health, because that's what Rachel Bloom does. She just is such an advocate for speaking about mental health, and she recently diagnosed with ADHD like me. And she said something that really resonated with me, that mental health like treatments and therapy is just essentially bespoke. You can't just tell people this is your way to do this and then slap it onto everybody else. Everybody should do classic therapy, everybody should do behavioral therapy, no. Maybe in different phases of your life you might try things, maybe you want to try things out, but nobody can just tell you need to do this. I feel like sometimes even therapists, they might know that it might really be good for you, but if you're just absolutely not ready for it, it doesn't make sense. If you don't want to be helped, you can't force somebody to heal. Yeah. So how do people like find you, and how do they come at you? Like, are they already ready for the thing? Just like heal me already? Like, do you hypnosis, or do you also feel there's still a lot of insecurity around it, because a lot of people don't really still know what hypnotherapy is, because the media is just making it like, oh, they're just dangling a little thing in front of your eyes and you control
started.
Which is funny, and which is not what it is. I mean, luckily they don't do that as much anymore. I feel like at some point it was a trend. Now they just don't even talk about it. But we'll see what the media are gonna pick up when they realize it's a thing now.
Yeah. In terms of how people approach me, I have 50-50, I think, in terms of like, some people really like, kind of not sure, is it a good thing for them? They heard this and that, and they want me to answer the questions, which I do. I love questions and just demystify certain things. Some people already like into some kind of, guided imagery or meditation, contemplative practices. They have been exposed to that. For them, it's a bit easier to create that bridge in between those practices and hypnotherapy, because they're very similar. And they're like, okay, let's do this. And like, there's the smallest percent that already have done hypnotherapy and it was successful. They're like, yes, let's do this today. So it's a whole range of experience, that's for sure.
That's good. It's just like creating awareness, so people talk about it and spread more awareness. It's like a snowball principle, right? Like with any kind of new thing, so to say, you will have that. And it's also based on scientific research. Like, it's not just some woo-woo people make up. Like, that needs to be also said, I think.
I have some studies in mind. I tend to not to do the best job explaining them, like how to explain a scientific study, that it is so complicated. But let me just try. There has been so many studies, actually, like tons and tons, decades of research, mindfulness research, actually capitalizing on all the research in hypnotherapy that's been already done. That is basically research and focus, and paying attention. There's so much of it in there. Every psychology student, at least here in the United States, would have heard about this study where the study subjects given words to read of the piece of paper, and they're names of different colors. And sometimes, the word blue would be blue color, which is very easy to read. There's no interference there in between, our desire to read what the word says and the color of the word. So there was very little error ever, in any study. But as soon as they would like put let's say the word red, but in yellow, that would
that
be a
confuses me
pause.
so much.
Yeah.
I don't like these
Like,
tests. I'm just like, wait. Then my brain just stops
right.
working. I'm like, wait.
Yeah, you need to pause and figure it out, because it's confusing. There's two different sources of data here, and they're not in alignment with each other. And historically, in all of those studies, there was those pauses and arrows people would make. And at the same time, when they tried to do the same scientific, no, they didn't try, they actually did it with hypnotherapy involved. They said to people, so now when you look at the board with all of those words written on it, and they are, they're mismatched, what I was just saying about the word red, it's in yellow, and the blue is in purple. They're mixed up, but you imagine that all of those words themselves are just gibberish. They don't mean anything.
Yeah.
So that you have no trouble identifying the color of the ink and saying it like quickly.
And like in a foreign language.
Yeah.
You don't even know what it says.
Exactly, the language that you don't know. And why they were guided to do so in a hypnotherapy and hypnosis, the amount of errors that they did was minimal. Like, it dropped down considerably from what it was when there was no hypnosis involved, and there was less pauses, and it was just much more quicker. So they have the same mind and the same brain, like they did, like maybe 10 minutes ago when they were looking at that board with words, but without hypnosis being involved. What is it about our mind that can receive suggestions like this and tweak, I don't know, something in how we perceive, and it's our perception is being changed here, to the point that the Stroop effect, that's the name of the study. Okay. Yeah. Can't cite it as of right now, but like I'll definitely find it when the podcast gonna come out, because I'm not just saying it, it's actually
Let's put it in the show notes so you can click on it.
Yes. So the Stroop effect was like so drastically smaller for the people in a study. And that's maybe like that's a nerd in me, but I geek out on things like this because for me it's a proof that words are powerful. Like, we can actually take in words. Somebody just told us, just think about it as a gibberish. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to think about it as a gibberish. Something clicked and it changed. And that has such huge repercussions in terms of healing, because we can say the same thing. And that's where hypnosis has been studying the most in terms of pain relieving capacities of hypnotic practices. There've been surgeries done when hypnosis when the only anesthetic, analgesic, one of those things that allows people not to feel pain. When people can imagine like discomfort or like slight tension instead of pain when there's a knife going inside the body, so that's like, that blows my mind every time I read something like this has happened, and it did happen. So anyway, you see, it's me going off and off and off, because yes, science definitely has been backing hypnosis up, and all of this pendants and oh, don't get me started. It's so old, it's so outdated, it doesn't have a place to be anymore, because it stops people from reaching out. Like stigma around anything is just like stifles the movement, stifles the appreciation. So anyway.
Exactly. No, it's just like, like that Eleanor Roosevelt quote, like, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Basically, if somebody would insult you in a different language, you'll be like, okay, so whatever. But if they insulted in your language and then you actually heeded their words, or like took it to heart or valued their opinion, or even if you're on the internet and strangers and trolls say things, it hurts, but it's mostly just because of what you make it, right? And it's not an easy thing to just say, like, I don't care anymore. You can't just flip that switch, I wish. But when you become more mindful of how it triggers you and what it actually says, because for instance, I'm a huge TikTok fan, because that's how I found out about my ADHD, and I found a community where they talk about psychology and different ways that the brain works, and especially neurodiverse brains work. And there's one creator, and I forgot the name, I might search it and put it in the show notes too, but she's ADHD, so she's autism and ADHD, I think. Definitely autism. And she was raised by parents who always instilled it that you are perfect as you are. If somebody comes and tells you that you're not beautiful, that you're not this or that, you come home, you tell me that, and I'll tell you that's bullshit. Right? So like, she has the best confidence according to herself. And if people were insulting her, then she's like, I don't care, my daddy loves me. And with that security, growing up in such a secure attachment, and knowing that you can express yourself any way you want, even if you are neurodivergent and society doesn't like you to have random stems and be disruptive, as they like to say, and don't express yourself in the way your brain needs. But she doesn't have, according to herself, any problems of just asking all of the whys, like kids do. And I always want to do that, but I feel a lot of shame around it, because that's what people told me. You can't just ask why, but my brain needs it until I get a lot of whys asked and answered. Then I can feel confident, and then I can do it by myself, and I usually do it really fast, really well. But I need all of my questions answered beforehand. Otherwise, I feel like the biggest loser. so bad and so dumb, and I know I'm not dumb, but it just gives me that feeling, and then I start to attribute all of these things, and then I start hearing the words in my head that people used. And again, when you get more mindful, you also realize, I'm not nice to myself. And I've heard that before. Maybe you can even pinpoint to certain moments that were traumatic, or certain people who kept saying things, even if they thought it was helpful. But the more mindful you are with your own choice of words, where you say, like, I can't do it, is that you can't, you do not want to, you are unable to do it, you don't have the capacity to do it, or you just it's not aligned right now, like you don't have time, like but you can do a lot of things. It's just like, what is it? Are you telling yourself you just can't be successful for whatever reason? Then that's what you're gonna get, right? So like, this is part of the manifesting, but it's also part of just being mindful, because your brain has a hard time differentiating between what is fake. If you keep telling yourself fake stories, and if you're reading a book, then your heart can like react to it, right? You go to an action movie and you suddenly feel like the adrenaline, you feel like the heart pumping, but nothing's actually like real, nothing's happening, you're safe. But the brain doesn't know it as well, right? So it's really important to treat yourself like an inner child, or like a toddler that you want to raise well and be there for yourself. And I think that was one of the biggest game changers for me, being mindful of like, oh my gosh, I would not talk to any of my friends like that, so why me? What is this double standard? And so when I started doing that for multiple years now, I'm just like, I would try to talk like, what would my best friend say in this scenario? And then I would just like unabashedly be like, this was awesome, good job for drinking water today, like even the basic thing, like you get a participation trophy or whatever, like just simple things. And now I do say stuff like that out loud, and people are like, oh, that sounds arrogant, like when people are saying yeah and and I was like, yeah, no, I know I'm intelligent, and then people go like, stop, and they're like, wow, where did that come from? As if I said something really offensive or arrogant. I'm like, no, it's just a fact, like I am. Because people always told me a lot of things that made me feel really dumb, or they literally say, oh my god, you're so dumb, you can't even do this thing, because I was stuck in executive paralysis, or I was just completely sensory overloaded, couldn't process things, or sometimes like today I had trouble with words. I couldn't find a lot of German words to talk to my friends, and I was just like looking like a stupid person, like really was just like, oh my god, I don't know how to articulate things. And so just telling myself, no, you're intelligent, actually helps me be like, fine, be like calm myself down, but also just gives me some sort of power. And the more, especially as a woman, sometimes it's really hard to be like, no, I think I'm beautiful. Like, I like myself. That's such a daring thing to do. Like, I don't say I'm a supermodel, or like I'm saying I'm better than anybody, or I'm not vain looking at the mirror and like, you know, preening. But I'm just like, no, I'm pretty, and it's, you know, whatever. Like, I worked hard on it. I wear makeup and I look after my hair. Like, there's a lot of work in it. But I didn't used to be pretty as like growing up. So now I'm like proud of this. Right? Like, I'm happy about it, but it's not, you know, like, so words matter, and you need to be mindful of what matters to you. So, yeah, I think that's really important with hypnotherapy, I guess, too. Like, the way you choose words. So how do you approach that? Because you also have your own biases and programs in place. So how do you combine it when you, like, want to be present for other people, but also need to be really careful of how you say things? Especially, I learned, for neurodivergent people would take things really literally. Right? So, like, if you, like, hypnotize them, you need to be super careful about what you say, how you say it, because they might take it up a notch.
Yeah. Choice of words is super important. And I just want to comment really quickly. I can so relate to, you didn't say it like that, but like having like that self-critical voice inside, and then learning to come back to it with more of a compassionate kind of stance of like your best friend, like talking to you like your best friend would do. Because I had to learn that, like very similar things some time ago, when I also, for many years now, I've been practicing that. But that's I think a topic in and of itself. Self-compassion, I think, like, it's absolutely necessary a skill to learn. But in terms of choice of words, for myself, well, first of all, like, I try to be as mindful as possible when I talk to someone in a conversation, and I can see how the word landed immediately. Did it land well? But, you know, the body language there. I like when people say something to me and it doesn't land, I can, you know, you can see it all over my face as well. So I can, like, you know, take it back and could offer some other word at that very moment in the conversation itself. I can't remember anything, like any specific example, but it definitely have happened to me before, when I saw the reaction and realized that, you know, it was not the right way to use in this situation. In terms of like guided sessions, when the people, you know, eye closed, they kind of silent, you know, I do check in with people to see where they at, like every 5 minutes or so, or it depends on the session, just because I want to make sure we're on the same page, but I also want to make sure that you know, what I'm saying is landing well. That's why I will, and that's, I think, what I'm going to share next kind of makes sense in the light of like the topic of choosing words carefully. I try to make my suggestions as open as possible. Let's say I don't tell people, imagine a beach with like seagulls and the waves, you know, like, because for some people that might be a soothing imagery, and for some people it might be triggering imagery, just because maybe that I had a bad experience on the beach and like now they're relieving it, and that's why I check in with them, you know.
Thalassophobia.
Yeah, something, you know, I might not know, I don't know, I don't have all the information about them. That's just what's happening here. So I try to make my suggestion either very open or check in regularly to make sure that we're on the same page. And I also write like the portion of the guided journey that it's very tailored, very bespoke, like you used that word earlier today, in advance. Sometimes I intuition comes through and I use words that just like come through in the moment. Speaking of intuition, we're like getting closer to this topic. But a lot of times I read them ahead of time. I was recording something this morning actually, and like, ooh, this word, it would sound okay in a normal like conversation, but when you are receiving it with your eyes closed, even the word discomfort is weird, you know, like the word threat would be like, what you just did to me. So I would like replace it with like challenge, you know, something softer. Just my general rules soften everything when in terms of like the words in a guided session, because they can have a really big impact since they're being pretty much the only focus of the person's attention. Of course they're gonna have an impact. So yeah, intuition. Ooh.
And I think that's such a good training also for yourself. Just generally when you feel words and become much more mindful of the impact and how it lands, like you read the reaction, but also when you look internally, like when you close your eyes and your senses are heightened, and then you say certain words and you realize, oh my gosh, like if I'm much more careful about which words I say, and people know it who are like in copywriting or even in law, very much aware of language and how different synonyms mean slightly different things, denotations, and some kind of flavor. That can be a really powerful tool for good or for worse. But it also again comes back to mindfulness when you realize that with yourself. And I think it's also a beautiful example, because a lot of people might see being so focused on yourself and self-development against self. But a lot of people see that as very selfish, because suddenly you start setting boundaries and suddenly you question things and you call things out. And then people say selfish, but you can also say, yes, everybody should be selfish to some extent, because like you said, if you are much more in tune with those words and if you are looking at how you react, then you can be more open to other people doing it too, but in their own way. And if you look at it from a compassionate, empathetic point of view and just being open and non-judgmental about it, then you can train yourself to project that onto other people. That kind of mindfulness of words, of being careful, because there's so many flippant things where people are like, oh, that's just a joke. But if it hurts somebody, it's no longer a joke. And if it's a joke to you, well, A, that says a lot about you, but also it says something about you not even knowing how words sting, the power words hold. And oftentimes people actually do know. They're just very uncomfortable with it being handed back, right? But that is so powerful when you realize that, yeah, words really change cultures, change the ways persons and professions and like things are perceived. There's stigma comes from a lot of words. It's like propaganda is built on words for a good reason, because of the power of words, right? So we can change entire landscape, and a lot of things are changing in language. And I study languages, so I've always been super interested in language change and did a lot of language history classes. And that was so fascinating to see like changing of words. At one point I wrote a paper about the change of words like awesome, like where it started. Like it used to be like awe-inspiring, you go into a cathedral and like you're like reminded of God and like how tiny and puny you are, so like you're in awe, but like not in like it's amazing, but you're like in fear of being squashed like an ant kind of thing. And now it's like shifted to being awesome, and that was like frowned upon when it came about, because like, oh my god, these flippant Jews, like look at their decay of the language, like that kind of thing. And now it's just something people use, and it doesn't really have that much of a meaning anymore, all that stuff. Like my favorite thing is like the bee's knees. It was like a thing for a while, and I just found out about it during my paper and the research, and I just wanted to make it a thing again, like make fetch happen. Didn't work. But, like things change all the time, and like genders change in words, and you become much more mindful of what words came from different backgrounds, and like what kind of denotation is there. Like the classic example is like Mr. and Mistress totally mean different things, but come from the same idea basically. Or if you go like to different languages, like husband and wife, and like Japan, like the wife basically means person in the house, and you're like, wait, what? Like stuff like that. And you just grow up with it, you don't question it, and you're like, then you come in as a like non-native speaker, and you're like, wait, what does that mean? Like, or like in Spanish, but like, yeah, as soon as there's like one man in the group, this female pronouns all become male. I'm like, wait, what? Why? Doesn't make sense to me. Don't we have a neutral? Excuse me, right? And so like you start questioning things and how it affects yourself. Or like when people, or there's this one thing they do sometimes in group workshops, to build trust and like show words when they do the thing. I don't know if it's spelled on scientific studies probably, but like if you just tell people like you're ugly, you're weak, you're stupid, like just come up with like insults, whatever, and you just tell that to the person, and then you make them like arm wrestle you or like just push you, whatever, like just push against the arm, and then just know what happens, and then the next round you just say nice things like, oh my god, I love you, you're so amazing, you're so strong, like whatever, and then do it again, and suddenly they can withhold you physically better. And I was like, that's nonsense, but it it wasn't. I tried it. I was like, no, that can't be true. And I was trying to fortify myself in my head. I'm like, don't let it get to you. Yeah, blah, blah. It's still, it was like, oh my god, is this like a placebo? Is this like a Barnum effect? I don't know. But that is, a good example of like the power of words. Even if you do hear it all the time, and if you try to fortify yourself, you try to be gray rocking this, and you're like, no, I know I'm better, I know I'm not weak, even if everybody says so, or like, you grow up in this environment where people are like very competitive, or not having your back and telling you all of the money you need to not waste, you need to keep everything, and you'll never grow up to anything, and everybody's taking everything. If you grow up in an environment like that, whereas if you have people have your back and like allow you to dream and be like, you can do whatever you want, as cliche as that sounds, and they're like, well, you failed, it's okay, it's a learning experience, that twist, that gives you an entirely different spin on the world, on yourself, and just builds that confidence. And so when people do come at you again, like that one creator I mentioned, and tell you like stupid things to your face, you can be like, nah, don't care. Like, but generally, right? And then you can also realize, I don't actually like how these people talk to me, I might just remove myself. Because you can and you should, and it's easier said than done, obviously. But again, like, that's the power of words. You can also use them against others, or just choose not to even hear them, like physically, like just remove yourself, don't even be in that environment, like get out of that, even if they're nice people, but it might not be good for you.
Yeah, so true. Power of words. Self-talk, like it wouldn't be nice to have this ability to like say to other people, but also to say to those parts of ourselves that can be worst critics. Maybe we internalize that from like somebody else in our life, maybe even when we're growing up, that the words that they were using to refer to us, now we're like using them to refer to ourselves, and bringing ourselves down, literally like draining that energy, like you were saying in your story. Like, we don't feel as strong enough, because word by word we just lose all of that power, but we can also bring it back. And I think that's been like the main lesson for me in my self-compassion journey, of just really noticing, like being mindful, like how I talk to myself in my own head, and a lot of times it wasn't nice, and it did involve other people, like needing other people validation, and always constantly comparing myself to them and feeling less than. Even if they wouldn't say anything, I already felt less than. On the inside, that was that self-talk that wasn't really good for me. And words, so much can just, we can shift if we choose and take the time to nourish our, like it's like food, you like psychic food. Literally, like if you give yourself vitamins, we're trying to eat healthy, so why can't we do that, the very same thing for our minds and for our hearts, and just the whole system.
Exactly. Like in the very first episode of this podcast, I had an energy healer on, and she was saying like she does like mental fluffing every day, where basically we did an exercise where I said one of my things was like money blocks, and then I had to come up with, I think it was even 20 different reasons why that's not true. And that was like a lot of mental gymnastics. But, for everything that you tell yourself you can't do, you can try to really come up with reasons why that's actually not true, or like good ways things could go. And the more you train yourself to not always see the worst case scenario, because that's what our lizard brains are trained to do, like naturally. Always look out for survival and threats. But if you see opportunities, then they are there for your taking, right? Because for the longest time I only saw threats. I was like such a victim, and I was like, no, everybody wants to take something, I need to protect myself. And then when things came knocking at my door, I would just be blind or skeptical, or a rejection would come in, and then I would not take them. And so like the more you are in this vibration, the better you feel, and the more you're actually open to things, and the more you're secure in yourself, the more you can also be like, no, that's a scam, or like that doesn't feel good for me. When people try to push something onto you, and you can be like, no, I don't need to be intimidated. I don't need to be like sold to, or have my objections smashed. Like, you know, that is common in marketing. I hate it.
Yeah.
Right, so you can be much more steadfast, so you don't have to be afraid of like some bad case scenario, because you'd be like, you know, they come anyway, but I got my back. That kind of thing, where you're like, no, I'm actually prepared. So yeah, I think I wish it would just start in childhood, honestly, when we would train our kids to be, you know, not little narcissistic assholes, but just like be nice human beings who express their feelings and see other people and allow that for them, and like where we can help each other. But it starts being like selfish and knowing yourself and your needs and how you can meet them, so you can tell other people, and then you can listen to them, and you know, like this compassion, like you do in your job. That's why all of these healing jobs are so important, not just physical like doctors, but also like mental. And even though you can't really grasp it, but it's funny, like you can actually, when people say, yeah, you can't see it, but yes, you can. Like if I'm like depressed or sad, people call me out on it. They're like, your energy is weird. Like, are you tired? Are you like jet lagged? Like, are you sick? You know, like my face looks different. My demeanor is different. Like my voice is different. Like even the other day, I left a voice message, and then someone came back at me and was like, wait, are you okay? Your voice was wobbly. Like, what's going on? I'm like, oh my God. Right? So like, it does affect you entirely. It affects your diet. It affects your physicality. Like, so much of your mental health affects your physical health. For me, it's always been like stomach problems, which apparently is very common with like ADHD. And my doctors didn't put two and two together, right? So like, there's still a lot of things that need to happen, and not just in like medical or psychological society, but just generally in society, we're still so hard resistant to change. And compassion as a whole, sometimes it's just like, I just want to shake the world. So let's be sure. What were they called? Where like they had like little rainbows on their belly, but like what were those called? Oh, Google help me out. Oh, here we go. Care Bears. Oh my God, yes, that's what it is. Glücksbärchenbande for all the Germans out there. The Care Bears. Yeah, because they had like their emotion literally on their sleeves, like actually on their belly button. Like they wore like a heart or like a lucky leaf, so people would know what their specialty is and like what they can help people with. And I was like, that's so cute.
See.
Right. So that was their power, you know? Self, like their self was the power. I'm like, oh my God, let's get soppy. Let's be Care Bears. Oh my God, I'm such a 90s kid.
Yeah. Shaping the world however we can, you know, like maybe one podcast at a time, you know, one good conversation at a time. Few words spoken in the right time, in the right moment, and like in the right place can be so powerful.
Can make such a difference if it's to yourself or other people. And sometimes, like sometimes I speak things to other people that I kind of wanted to speak to myself, but it still lands. And I'm like, oh, I needed that. I'm like, oh, good, good, I needed it too. So we're both happy now.
Yeah. I can so relate to that. Beautiful.
Yeah. And what do you want people to know about hypnotherapy that we haven't covered?
I guess I want to leave people just like with one interesting thought for them to explore. I've been exploring it myself. I've been exploring the thought of hypnosis being guided meditation on steroids. That's how I call it. Like when people ask me like, what is hypnosis? Is this weird whoa thing? I'm like, no, it's been around for many not decades, centuries, in the form of a guided meditation, the experiential kind of internal journey been around for how I don't even know. Like I just think about loving kindness that comes from Buddhism, that it's all about evoking this beautiful feeling towards yourself, towards, the closest people, strangers, the whole world. It is a very much what we do in hypnosis as well. Sometimes we evoke a sense of confidence in someone, and we will I will invite them to think about the memories when they felt a certain way, and that kind of like copy and paste it in all of the other situations that's out there that they need that resource in. It's very much similar to the guided meditation structure in and of itself. And I've been trying to kind of move towards speaking up about this a little more. Some people like finally take the word hypnosis or the hypnotherapy and just clean it gently off all the junk that kind of surrounds it, because experientially guided meditation and hypnotherapy are like pretty much identical. I'm at least like for me, I have, and I guess the book. I have a very cool book on this topic. I wish I brought it with me. I should just I just should carry it with me. And when people ask me, or when people
Get it as a
tell me like,
t-shirt.
oh, hypnotherapy.
Like
Yeah.
a merch.
Oh, yes, you're right. Thank
Or like
you.
a
Oh, that's
necklace.
a great idea.
There's people who make like tiny book necklaces.
Uh-huh. Like, it's a good conversation starter. Like, do you want to know that hypnotherapy is just like guided meditation? So it's like, come on, people, let's. But the book is called Mindfulness, Meditation, and Hypnosis. I don't remember, maybe show notes. But the beautiful thing about that book, the author of that book, who are also one of the person I studied with, goes and analyzes text of guided meditations and hypnotherapy journeys side by side, and you can see how they all have the same structural elements. Hypnotherapy people tend to be a little more trained in how we use the language. Guided meditation people, they don't necessarily have that training. They have a kind of slightly different angle to what they do. So that there is some
intuitive.
differences.
Like more like, guided by spirit, or like downloads, or like what they're feeling in the moment, I guess.
They don't necessarily differentiate between softer and more direct style of suggestion given. Like I, for example, and that's the last thing I'm going to say, and I'll stop right there. I'm someone who doesn't necessarily like to be told what to do, especially directly. Like, go do this.
Oh yeah, same.
And I think a lot of people don't. Like we're not that special in that sense. So when I hear when I do guided meditation, like, do this, close your eyes, notice this, and like, it's very like, especially if it's spoken in like a very firm voice, my whole being just want to rebel against it and like, no. But if you change it a little bit, and this is how I most of the time say things, you can close your eyes. You don't have to, you can. Like, that's the assumption behind it. You can relax, you can notice, you can be comfortable, but I'm like, okay, it feels like I have an option there. Yeah, I have an agency there. And I feel like that's just a very simple thing, allows for the guided meditations or hypnotherapy journey, in this case, to be much more successfully received. And there is no magic to it. It's just because the way we say things, it was more inviting, it was more open, versus when some people use the direct commanding kind of languaging. So some of those things are, there. The differentiate guided meditations, hypnotherapy, well done hypnotherapy journey. So I just want to plug it in, and hopefully people will explore that topic.
I love that. And also, on the flip side, you need to be more mindful of who you're listening to, what kind of meditations, and how you feel afterwards, right? So, like, not everything is for everybody, obviously, but there can also be, with the rise of the spirituality, and there's a lot of, trouble of potential for, those gurus coming up, like just putting people on a pedestal or putting your ego above it, that can also be tricky in the spiritual society, that not everybody, but it can be misused as anything, basically. But if you find like these meditations, and for me, what I had for the longest time that was super resistant, exactly like you said, with meditation, it was just like those teachers back in school will tell me, sit still, open your like perk your ears and listen up and take it in. And my little ADHD self would be like, nah, I'm just gonna fidget around here. I'm just gonna not do this, and intrinsically knowing that exactly is not how I retain information. I need to literally stim, so I would doodle. I need to literally focus on something else, so my brain could focus on you, teacher, which makes me look like I'm like daydreaming, which gets me yelled at or shamed, and then teachers wouldn't believe you. Whatever, like again, trigger, but. Then also it is like, that's what I've heard, is also a bit more of a masculine approach, where you have to be really mindful, you have to be really sitting there, and you need to like wait for something to happen. And me would be like, no. Right? Again, I need to be distracted, but also why can't I just like move my finger? Like, can I do that? Like being a little rebel, but I'm like, why can't I just like undulate my hips or like shake, like if it's itching, like especially in the beginning when I was so averse to meditation, because especially if you have a racing mind, it can completely trip you up, it freaks you out. Like it really had I had adrenaline from it. I felt panicked, I felt like super hectic. It triggered me a lot. I couldn't sit, like relief, and I couldn't do it. And people were like, you need to do this, you need to do that. I'm like, I cannot, I'm unable to do this. It's freaking me out. And I would like observe people. I'm like, what is going on? Like, what did you take? Why are you statues? I felt so weird. I felt like so othered. And then when people tell you should just do, or like, this is easy, then I felt really weirded out. Like, I was like, so I'm the only one? Again, I'm like the only one, the strange person? That makes you feel out of touch again. That makes you less inclined to try it. And then when people were like suggested to me, like, yeah, you can just also dance, or you can just stare at the wall or your plants, like that could be your meditation. Go for a walk, look at the waves, look at the clouds, and all of that can be meditation. Or you can meditate while dancing, close your eyes and listen to the meditation, or you can like do some mild yoga, as long as it just doesn't distract you too much. Whatever works for you in that moment, whatever you need. Meditation at its core, as I understand it or see it, is just to like not even clear your mind, because that's not even possible. But this analogy of it being like the sky. Like the sky is blue, but there can be clouds, there can be like whatever pollution or fog, whatever, but it's still the sky, and the sky is still blue. Right? So there's all of these thoughts, all of this fog, all of the clouds, but the sky is still blue. So you just want to get to the point where like, okay, they just pass by, I see all of that, I observe it, but I don't even take it on. I'm just like the plane going there, and like just whatever happens, right? I can't control the weather, but I can just look at it. And I can, decide to like actually look at the clouds and study them, or I can just close my eyes and be like, yeah, I'm drifting through space, whatever. Whatever you're capable of in that way. And I think that gives you so much more power, and actually twists it on its head, instead of having it like a chore or something you need to do to get to a higher level, or be more self-conscious, or to calm down, which again feels like, oh, you need to work out and exercise. It's the same thing. Don't tell me to do that, I will not do it. But if you tell me like, yeah, you can just fly through the clouds on an airplane, I'm like, yeah, I will do that. That sounds cool. Amazing. And I can dance too. Amazing. Thank you. I'll try it. Right? It just gives you, again, less of a prescriptive model. And yeah, if you say that's similar to hypnosis, because you don't just tell people like, think about this trauma, and it's like, look at it and pretend as if you're like an adult helping your childhood self, whatever. But you can be like, what do you need in that moment? What do you wish we could do right now? What do you say to yourself? Like, I don't know, whatever you're going there, you're still co-creating it with the people, so they are not triggered. Sure. Like you said, you read their minds. And the same you can do with meditation, where you observe your reactions to things. Like, oh my gosh, that was a random thought, and it just like made me feel this way. Then you can be like, oh, I've had that often. Like, you can do that when you're suddenly mindful in your day-to-day life, and suddenly you're like, wait, there's this thought and this feeling again. And the more it happens, the more you notice it, and the more you can like dismantle it and like work through it, like therapy. Like just basic therapy, but helped again by hypnotherapy and mindfulness. Like it feels like a full circle thing. I think it's really important.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Mindfulness, hypnotherapy, self-compassion. I think we covered so many things.
We covered so much, and we actually had a different topic we wanted to talk about.
Yeah,
Maybe
right.
we have to come back.
I was trying to get us there, like intuition, and you're like, nope.
I know. No,
Let's
no,
go.
I'm all about psychology now. I'm like, put my teeth in there, let's fight it.
That's great. It means that we just have to do it again, which
Yes, we
I'll
definitely
totally
do.
down for
Because
that.
like, I could talk to you much, much longer. This was so much fun. Yeah. Where can people find you if they want to get helped by you or just follow your journey? Nice. Okay. That's nice. I mean, yeah, social is so important, and it's great to start a conversation, like, slide into DMs or just stalk your thoughts. Because, having little reminders every day to be more mindful or to, like, ask yourself questions is super important. I think it's a good break in the feed. I like that. So is there
Thank you.
any takeaway you want to leave the viewers with?
I think we covered so much in regards to like power of words specifically, and that's something I want to take with me myself as much as I want to leave it as a takeaway for other people. First of all, actually, let me correct myself. When I close my hypnotherapy sessions, I let people choose what they want to take away. I'm like, now, take your time to sort through whatever have come up for you, maybe like bring something closer you want to hold on to. So that would be my actually more natural propensity to do so. Like, hey, I'm sure there were a few things that, stood out for you. So please take them with you and make them yours and apply them as much as you want to. And if you want to take away what I'm taking away, that would be the power of words and really being mindful how we talk to ourselves in our heads and not allowing other people to label us in any way, shape, or form, staying strong in our center, no matter what.
I love that. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting. That was lovely, lovely, lovely.
I love it. Warm, fuzzy feelings.
Yay! Exactly.
All right, I'll have you back, so everybody stay tuned for that. And then hopefully we'll talk about why I even started this podcast, because that's a long journey too.
Yeah.
But it's fun. All right, so have a lovely day, because you're still in the daytime. That's the funny thing with time zones. All right, sending you lots of love into the past from the future.
Right. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Cool. Yay. Bye.
And that wraps up the episode. I hope you really enjoyed listening to it as much as I had fun talking to Yelena, because we went deep on all of the topics, as I think is a common thread on this podcast, because I do not like small talk. I want to get deep. I want to really dive into topics that I find are so fascinating. And to me, psychology is one of those special pieces of interest that I have. I find it really fascinating how people work, why they do things they do, why I do things I do, and I could talk about it for hours, which I kept repeatedly saying, and I mean it. So maybe in a future episode we'll just pick up on that and get a therapist on there, or anybody who's related to neuroscience. That would be cool. So if you know somebody like that, write me an email, drop me a line on social media, or maybe you are one yourself and listen to this episode. I want to thank you for listening, and feel free to reach out on all of the social media platforms of your choosing. Say hi to Yelena, because she also needs some love and support, and maybe you want love and support from her as well. So do check out all of the links. They are down in the comments below, as well as the links of books and things and podcasts that we mentioned in this here podcast, so it's easy for you to find. And don't forget, if you like this podcast, that you can subscribe to it and follow it, but also share it with your friends if you found it really helpful. And that would be great to spread the word, because it's pretty new and I could use all of the help and all of the support I can, because it just feels nice and warm and fuzzy. And I wish you a nice and warm and fuzzy week, and I talk to you next week in the next episode. Bye bye.